you're serious about making your money work for you, then you should write down all the points I'm making in this video and actually act on it. Do not make it something that you do next week or tomorrow or in the evening or after work. You just do it. I also kind of want to give you some guesses as to why I am dressed in beige. I'll give you 5 seconds. Was talking about making that bread. There were 3 main pillars to making sure that I was in a primed position to actually start investing comfortably with enough knowledge and confidence to be able to do so. And that was making sure my emergency fund was fluffed up. I was making sure that, you know, my pension was being contributed to efficiently, and that also there weren't more high interest debts that I would be better off putting money towards before I actually started putting money towards investments. Now, it's important to highlight that, like, with investments, there's always the risk that you could lose your money. I think that's the one line that scares people the most, and while it is true, the risk of that happening kind of pays off by leaving your investments alone for a long period of time. And that's the kind of the common bottom line that you'll find with all the videos that tell you why investing is better and why you should do it. It's because if you leave your investments alone for a long period of time, that's where you see the majority of your returns. Another huge myth is that if you invest, you have to be a trader, you have to be really well versed with stocks and financially analyzing companies, and that you basically live this kind of like inaccessible financial life. And that's a myth, because I'm an investor. I only started teaching myself about stocks and shares ISAs about 2.5 years ago. There's nothing complicated about what I do. It was just more about making sure I was in a really primed position to be able to take that first step myself, because at the end of the day, no one's going to make investments for you. You need to be able to do it yourself. You need to be able to realize the value in it and take the first step. So the first pillar of being able to invest and priming yourself to invest is making sure that you are debt-free. And by debt-free, I don't mean that you don't have credit cards, because we all have credit cards and we all know the value in using credit cards to get points, travel points, spending, cash back, whatever it is. There's always a value in using a credit card to do your spending rather than not. But this is kind of checking that you don't have debts that you cannot afford to pay off every month in full, because those are the high interest debts that you're literally better off putting money towards to get rid of those. Because basically, if you tally up the interest that you'd have to pay on these credit cards, it's higher than the returns you would get on your investments. So it just makes more mathematical sense to pay off high interest debts first. So that was figuring out if you have high interest debt that you should be paying off first, and then you can focus on investing later. And the second thing to ensure you're doing right is, you know, handling your pension properly. If you have a job where your employer is matching your contributions or paying it higher than what you contribute, then are you maximizing that? Because that is literally tax-free savings, and pensions are investments. Like, pensions are invested into the stock market, into funds, into whatever it is. You should look up what your pension provider is doing with your pension. Those are investments. The idea is that you contribute into them when you first get a job, so that by the time you retire and start to withdraw from that pension, they are obviously going to be worth a lot more because of things like compound interest. And the third part of the first pillar is the emergency fund, and I feel like everyone bangs on about this, and it's for good reason. A lot of people don't see the value in having an emergency fund, especially if, you know, you have people that you could rely on, your partner, your parents, any kind of family, anything like that. You should always make sure that you are covered. You have covered yourself, and you know you have covered yourself. I think the recommended amount for an emergency fund is something like between 3 to 5 months of being able to basically fend for yourself without your main source of income. So that includes, you know, your actual salary and being able to cover your monthly expenses at the very minimum. That is what would form your emergency fund. I've explained this a little bit more in my July budget video, because building up my emergency fund was actually one of my financial goals for this year. It means that if, you know, the worst, absolute worst were to happen, I was to lose all of my investments, I was to lose my job, I was to lose everything else, I would be able to at least survive for that maximum of 5 months, or however long you're wanting your emergency fund to cover you for. Now, the second pillar to making sure you're in a primed position to begin your investments and actually start, you know, get over that fear, is to make sure that you have enough cash left over after all of the things from the first pillar, so your emergency fund, your pension, and paying off your debts, that you have enough cash left over to completely lose. Like if you lost that amount of cash that you have left over, you wouldn't miss it. And I know we'd all miss money if we lost it, like we would, but I'm saying worst case scenario, if you did lose it, you'd be fine, because that is the amount that you should start investing with. And for me, this amount is extremely low because I'm just starting out and I'm making moves towards other financial goals at the same time. So you figure this amount out from essentially kind of budgeting, maybe doing a historical budget, maybe see how much you spent over the last 6 months. If you are in a position where you don't have any high interest debts to pay off and you're putting the max contribution into your pension and you have an emergency fund, it's like the 3 golden rules. You'll be able to figure out if there's maybe cash that you could get from cutting spending in other places, and this has to be non-essential spending. So really, I really want to hammer home the point that if you lost this money, if you never saw it again, you'd be fine. That is your minimum investment amount a month for your investments. And then the third pillar, and this is the final pillar to priming yourself to investing, is figuring out if you have enough time to research your investments. This kind of results in 2 things. It results in you figuring out your kind of like risk personality, if you're risk averse or you like risk. And this will then determine whether you would primarily want to be investing in index funds, ETFs, mutual funds, or actual stocks, like company stocks. Your approach to risk is pretty important because it determines all of these things for like your future investments and your habits involving investments. So you should decide basically, how much time do you have? Are you willing to put aside a couple of hours a week to research stocks? Because stocks have to be researched really well. You have to do a little bit of financial analysis on stocks to figure out if you have the confidence to put your money in those shares, and if you have the confidence that you'll get a return on those via company growth. There's a lot to be considered with stock investments and riskier fund investments, and this is personally why I have chosen to invest in index funds for my first kind of investment, and the bulk of my investments are in index funds. And it's important to note that index funds themselves, the fund itself invests in the top performing stocks. So because the fund itself is doing all that work, it's kind of a very low time investment from me and a very kind of medium moderate return over time. So it follows along the saying, the higher the risk, the higher the return. So you have to make do with how comfortable you are with risk to then determine your return over time. I want to emphasize, over time, not now. And then there's kind of like aftercare points to then figure out after getting through those 3 pillars. And the first one is kind of determining what platform you're going to invest with. So you figured out, you can invest because you've got your pension, you've got your emergency fund, and you've got no high interest debts. You figured out, like the minimum cash amount you'd be willing to never see again to actually make the investments with. Now it's time to determine what platform you're actually going to use. I personally use Vanguard because it's really simple. They offer what I'm looking for, which is mainly index funds, and they charge slightly lower fees than, the general competition. The other one you could look into in the UK is Hargreaves Lansdown, and the main point with Hargreaves Lansdown is that they offer a huge variety of services that you can invest in. So I think it's like 2,500 funds and loads of different ISA options. So again, it kind of depends what you want out of the service. I wanted a simple stocks and shares ISA, and I wanted to make monthly deposits into an index fund, and that's what I got with Vanguard, plus the lower fees. Thinking about the fees, most of the percentages you'll see are like quite low. So Vanguard's average fee cost is 0.15%, and if you apply this to like 100k, that's £1,500. And the average fee cost for Hargreaves Lansdown is about 0.45%, and if you again apply this to 100k, it's £4,500. So you're basically paying £3,000 for that wider range of services and the wider range of ISA options, and other little things. Like Hargreaves Lansdown has a really functional, easy to use app. Vanguard doesn't. I don't really mind that because I'm not planning to check my investments and make kind of deposits on the go or anything like that. There are lots of things to consider when you're choosing what platform to invest with, but you should definitely consider all the factors and try and incorporate some of your future goals. So if you're wanting to invest in more stocks and a wider range of funds in the future and kind of like diversify your portfolio a bit more, Hargreaves Lansdown might be a better option for you. And there's no saying that you have to stick with one platform. You can open multiple types of ISAs. You can only have one stocks and shares ISA that you contribute to in the year though. I wanted a simple low-fee platform to get the ball rolling with my investments, and that's what I got with Vanguard. And the second really important thing to emphasize is once you set up that standing order, apart from, you know, considering increasing it as your income maybe increases or your ability to save increases, you forget about that standing order for literally minimum 15 to 20 years. You just forget about it and let compound interest do its thing for the next couple of decades. Just to recap the things I mentioned in this video, the 3 pillars. The first one was making sure that you're contributing into your pension effectively and efficiently and to the maximum. You have a fully funded emergency fund before you even think about any of this, and that you have no high interest debts that would potentially be more efficient to pay into right now. The second pillar was making sure that, you know, you come to a cash amount that you are willing to just never see again every month, and that forms the basis of that standing order that you're going to be putting into your investments every month. And the third pillar was deciding how much of your time you can comfortably invest into investing. So if you don't really have that much time and you're very risk averse, you're probably gonna like index funds, ETFs, mutual funds. But if you have the time and you don't mind that bit of risk and you even want to make time for that bit of risk, you're probably going to enjoy and also be able to dedicate more of your time into determining stock investments to make. So that was an extremely high level recap of the kind of 3 pillars that have helped me finally end up getting the ball rolling with my investments. I hope these have helped you a little bit and given you a little bit of a push in the right direction to start thinking about these things. And as my boyfriend loves to say, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is right now. Go think about where you want to plant that tree. Make sure the grass is all primed and the soil is, you know, perfect, and make that deposit, set up that standing order and forget about it. Also, please remember that I am not a financial advisor and I'm not qualified in any way. This is just a depiction of the knowledge I've gained in researching how to make my own investments and a couple of tips to help you guys. Hope you enjoyed this video and I'll see you next week. Bye!